the next level for Africa. But one thing I can say is that the opportunity is now. And if we miss the opportunity to be able to scale up on the actions that must happen for Africa, it would be a terrible thing, not just for Africa, but for those who have missed that opportunity.
Thank you. Cynthia, you are running a conglomerate as an American, an African multinational, Anglo-American. Normally when we come to these forums, business is expected to commit. I'm not business. Do you think we have fully, if I may say, leveraged the contribution of the private sector? To what extent do we still have to go to do so? I'm asking you because you lead the #1 company on the African continent. Do you know that the next week is the policy conference of the African National Congress? So you lead that kind of a giant company, which has found its genesis on this continent, albeit named after America and the United States and the UK. President Mbeki has also asked the question: what is it that government should do? What can they still do as government, as various African governments, to bring us to the party? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, President Mbeki. The corporate sector clearly has a significant role to play in helping to build skills and broader capacities in the countries where we work. And this will be achieved largely by the core businesses that we build through training and development of our staff. And we often talk about philanthropic activities contributed by corporations, but largely the core businesses are the ones that really generate the contribution to society. And significantly, obviously, in the form of taxes. In the case of Anglo-American, we contribute about $1.6 billion in taxes in Africa. In the case of wages, about $2.6 billion on an annual basis. In the case of supply chain, represents about $8 billion. So it's pretty substantial, and it contributes hugely to the development of the infrastructure, to healthcare systems, to education with the host governments wherever we are. So having a strong and a competitive base of companies that invest and build intellectual and social capacities in Africa is a fundamental part of capacity building. And Anglo contributes to a water capacity building in many different ways. In the case of healthcare, in HIV, in the case of infrastructure building to support communities and support regions in which we operate with the governments, in the case of training and education, local enterprise development through a work called Anglo. And there are others to improve governance and the investment climate for the countries where we operate. With South Africa in particular, President Mbeki has done a fantastic job in creating the mechanisms for private enterprise to contribute their share. And in so doing, in the case of Anglo, we've been supporting the government's Accelerated Growth Initiative, training on the average of 6,000 people, giving bursaries, giving sponsorships to students on an ongoing basis. We support the long-standing work through the Chairman's Fund in education schemes and trying to train people and develop people in their teaching skills throughout South Africa. Another key challenge to multinationals is to develop and build a local supply chain. And this is fundamental to all of our futures as private enterprises and companies. And in so doing, in the case of Anglo, we've been working for the last 18 years or so to build up small and medium enterprise companies. Today, through those companies, they employ about 3,000 people. And the survival rate of those small companies today is about 95%. As well, we also support, with 8 other international businesses, the Investment Climate Facility for Africa, which really is not about deregulation, but about building capacity within national administrations to design regulation that's effective in areas like reducing the red tape associated with business licensing, or streamlining customs procedures, strengthening property rights, and examining some of the legal processes that impact businesses. We also support, and many businesses do as well, Business Action for Africa, which help, and in the case of Anglo, we are co-chairs, cooperating with the government to reduce and tackle the custom barriers in West and East Africa. And we're piloting right now approaches to combat corruption. And finally, we are involved in the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative to promote greater transparency and greater governance of the resources in which our operations help to generate. But coming back to the specific question is what attracts us to Africa and what will propel us into more activities in Africa and investments in Africa. And President, I would say to you, first and foremost, is a willingness to engage and to act as partners, as one, to create more in the countries where we are. We look at infrastructure development. We look at the opportunities for privatization in some of those areas. We look at the energy supply, and there's huge amount of work ongoing, as we know, in the case of South Africa, to satisfy the demand needs going forward. But we look at the possibilities for involving ourselves more in that area. We look at the flexibilities of approaches, regulation, policies, to streamline decision-making and the processes to accelerate our investments. And finally, we look for a common approach around achieving best practices in all that we do. And whether it's safety, or whether it's the environment, or whether it's training and deployment of our own people, we want to be the best, and we want to be global leaders together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. President Wada, you'd like to say a word? Cynthia, you should be talking, looking at me, not at the President. Zanele Mbeki is here. Stop looking at the President. We're going to allow for questions, also for comments. I want to do that before I give President Wade to speak again. President Wade will come after your questions, and he'll make other remarks. Is it okay, Mr. President?
Yes.
Merci beaucoup. It's a conversation. You are now free and welcome to make some comments, ask some questions, but most importantly to hear your side of this conversation. Let us make it a dialogue. The microphones are there. Will you assist us, please? There's a hand there.
There's a hand there.
President has seen another one this side. We were there. You start.
Thank you very much for giving me a chance to ask a question. My name is Cardinal. I work for an organization called Civicus. First of all, I want to concur with the presidents who have reiterated again that Africa is not per se a poor continent. Africa is poor because of a history of plundering that Africa has suffered from many centuries through slave trade, through colonialism, through poor governments that were only sustained because of the Cold War politics, a bad deal in terms of international trade. And we have seen all these attempts to call for increased aid, better terms of aid. We have also seen the World Bank and the IMF trying to listen to the public about the implications of their sponsored structural adjustment policies and so on. Now, there have been some calls for compensation. And we know that compensation has happened, for instance, in the context of slave trade, but only towards those that were employing slaves. What is restricting our African leaders from supporting this call for some kind of compensation? Because aid is a good thing, but aid is only a charitable gesture from the donor to the recipient. But I think as Africans, we are entitled to be compensated because of this history of plundering that we have suffered from time immemorial. What has restricted our political leaders from asking for some kind of compensation and recognition that we are entitled to just more than charity.
Can we just take another question there? Let's take a set of 5 and then.
Excellencies, I'm going to differ quite substantially to what the previous speaker has said. As an African, I share greatly and enthusiastically about the vision of NEPAD and the renaissance of Africa. Our challenge is to ensure that we translate that vision into action. I do recall about 5 years ago, and I said it at an earlier get-together today, that I attended a NEPAD conference in Dakar, where a representative of the World Bank said that Africa doesn't need aid from the West. Africa just needs Africans to bring back the money that they've stolen out of Africa. And he put that estimate at hundreds of billions of dollars. Our challenge as Africans is to do what is right and to get the leaders in a position to enthuse our people to realize the potential in our continent.
Please.
From the World Energy Council, and I think that President Mbeki says that the African presidents identify what should be done to develop Africa in terms of infrastructure development, in terms of human capacity building, and also in terms of the agricultural development. So I haven't heard any positive response on his question, who should pay, who will pay. So I think the President Wed says that if we create a fund from the oil revenue, from the profit of the oil of the big oil companies, this is maybe a solution that we can put forward. But I haven't heard from the response from Cynthia or the World Bank what should be done concretely to bring this finance to develop Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Another question? There is a hand. Move quickly with the microphones. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to follow up. I'm Peter Ngatejize from Uganda. On the statement from His Excellency President Ward, with respect to Africa being a sick continent, and possibly inform you, I was involved in a study looking at U.S. assistance to Uganda, basically to Africa actually. And there was huge increases of resources for health, and yet a decline in support to the agricultural sector, which His Excellency Mbeki is talking about. Can we have a comment on this dialogue and in relation to what we tell G8 in terms of really where the resources should be? Do we have a strong position, or we accept we are sick and maybe more resources go there, and hence we are maybe not in harmony with the position that His Excellency Ward seems to have thrown at us? Thank you.
Thank you. There's a gentleman there. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I think I really was enthused and I was applauding when President Mbeki asked that pointed question. And truly, this is what has been going in my mind, that we need to get our presidents, our ministers, and all those who are in the commanding heights of our political governance in Africa to do one simple thing. That simple thing is to get together with the private sector on a sustained basis to reach a pact with them. I had indicated in one environment that if I was a minister of industries, what I would do was to go from one industry to the other. I say last year you made a sort of a $1,000 or $100 million. You are employing only 300 people. Can you tell me what you need to do to double your turnover to 200 million and employ 600 people? If these kind of questions are asked and covenants are reached, we all should then go out, do our part, get together again after 1 year and measure where we're going. I believe that if the governance and economic management of Africa is seen as a partnership between all sides, most of the times you get the impression that one side seems to think that they know all and they want to do it their own way. It's difficult to get ministers or permanent secretaries or not to talk of presidents to come to meetings this way and spend time and listen and ask questions. You have to beg and cringe to get them come to a meeting which is being called for the economic development of a country. And they do as if they are doing you a favor when they come to those meetings. After opening ceremonies, they walk away. How are we going to get at it? The way to go is this way. Let's sit down together, ask us this kind of questions, challenge us, and we'll tell you what you need to do for us. A pact is reached. 1 year, let's get together and see whether we've done it. That is the way to go. That's my own comment. Thank you very much.
One more question from me.
Before then, Heiko, how are we doing for time? We still have 15 minutes. Thank you. There's another question.
One question from me.
Please, make it brief.
My question is that we've heard the good things that we have done, and perhaps this forum is a good forum to discuss our successes. But can also the leadership share what they haven't done, the mistakes that they have made? And perhaps my question is even more broader to the extent that as leaders of Africa, do you engage each other on the bad things that the African leaders have done in order to change each other's path in terms of development for Africa?
Heiko, have you said 5? You've cut 5. We're told earlier if we go too long, it affects 10 other things that will be happening hereafter. I'm going to restrict the questions because the conversation will continue. This is just the open session to allow the conversation of the conference to begin. That's why it's an opening plenary. I'm going to ask Comrade President Wade. I'm full of another language. I'm going to ask President Wade to make remarks, which will be followed by Cynthia, which will be followed by Obi, and President Mbeki will conclude for us. President Wade, we left with 5 minutes. I give you 1.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je voudrais répondre d'abord à la question.
I would like to answer the question.
Qui doit payer?
Who will pay?
Dans le cas du Sénégal,
In the case of Senegal,
beaucoup déjà de l'aide internationale.
we are benefiting from international assistance.
Considering the translation, you should give me more times.
Is that fair enough? Considering the translation, more time.
No, okay. So, je disais que
So I was saying that
nous avons l'aide de la France.
so we receive assistance from France, from the United States,
La France, l'Union européenne.
France and the European
Les
Union,
États-Unis,
the United
comme tous les
States,
pays africains.
just like all African countries. That's the reason why I did not mention that, because all African countries benefit from these institutions.
The difference is, let me continue in English.
Okay.
The difference is that we have succeeded in managing our economy so that we have no more program with IMF. IMF think that we have well managed our economy. We don't need its intervention in Senegal. So now we have just a program of cooperation without disbursing money. This is a way to show that we can manage our economy and one day to get rid about aid from outside. So what was the output of G8? Regime 1, they recognize that they have not applied the African plan of action. We worked it out in green in Canada. They have not applied what they decide in the Eagle in England to give Africa $50 billion by year. And the decision was that now we want to commit ourselves to apply the last decisions that were not applied. This is first. Secondly, they announced $50 billion. $50 billion. But I think that it was for health. This is my interpretation, but it was not very clear. I'm sure that it was not for infrastructure or other things. So we benefit from China, but particularly from India, that give us material for agriculture in long-term loan, 1.5 as interest rates, and 20 years. Where Africa can get money from outside, from loan. The other remark I would to put that is the fundamental conditions to get the external investment in our countries is first political stability, peace, good management of the economy, equilibrium of the macroeconomy. And I will give you two examples. Madam, that represents Anglo-American, they are now applying to invest in Senegal more than $1 billion. I think because they know that Senegal is a stable country where you can get profit and export profit. The second example I would, 2 days ago, I was traveling since 10 days. I was traveling. And a banker called me 2 days ago, saying that, Mr. President, I know that I was told that Senegal launched a tender to loan money. I said, I don't know. He said, okay. Anyway, I am ready to participate for $34 billion. The banker told me, c'est la CBAO in Africa. It's well known. Why the investors are confident in Senegal? The case of Senegal should be studied to know why we are succeeding in developing our country. The last word I would say, Mr. President, is that I am for the free market. I'm for the free market. But I think that before talking about aid, we should talk in justice. There is no justice against Africa because our raw materials are sold in not good prices. This is the problem of petrol, the problem of cacao, the problem of all raw materials. This is a fight we should do as African leaders. And my last word, Mr. President, is that we should manage in Africa a continental space without any obstacle in our internal commerce. I'm partisan of United States of Africa. Any of our countries cannot develop itself in the long term if they make barriers. We should create a big African market. Je pourrais dire, puisque le Sénégal est un succès, many Africans are coming from the other countries, many. And we never raise any obstacle against them because we know that this is a condition of progress of Africa.
It makes me to feel bad to cut a good conversation, but as I said, it will continue. Obi?
I thought you said Cynthia.
Cynthia? Oh, yes. Cynthia first.
I
know what I said earlier about where I sleep, yes.
Come back to repeat very briefly what I had said earlier. I think it's all about partnerships and partnering with the communities, with the stakeholders, and principally with the governments. I think for governments to be working to attract multinationals with global standards who can act as models is absolutely key to the success of the economies. And I would modestly suggest that Anglo can be such a model. I think that in attracting the partners, as you asked, it is about openness, it's about transparency, it's about being flexible, and it's about the desire to apply those global standards to achieve greatness together, and a willingness to develop the training activities, the community involvement programs and initiatives, the healthcare support, working with the government on infrastructure, on education, attracting women into the workforce, are all the sorts of things that the companies should be doing and the private sector should be doing in combination with the government at their sides. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. Me?
I think that we need to really keep on our minds the fact that the continent must get the support it needs for its development to happen. The issue of a more transparent society within the continent is no longer a subject matter that outsiders drive. It is now a subject matter that most countries are developing strategies to deal with. And to the extent that they still continue to have difficulties, and there are some blind spots still, there are huge areas that need increasing reforms in the continent. So let's not be triumphalist about Africa. But the point we're trying to make is that the things that are good that are happening, let's separate the two classifications. Countries that are growing, that are going to need a lot of more support in terms of infrastructure, which can be a growth breaker, in terms of getting the education system to producing vocational, technical, competent personnel that would power that development. And then the ones that are not growing, that need to make fundamental economic choices that would enable the growth to happen. Let's see how we can support their competencies to make those decisions. And in the engagement with whether they be traditional partners or they be new entrants to the game, let us keep in mind the fact that the institutional and technical capacity to really enter the dynamics of dialogue on its development must come from the continent. And let every one of us, therefore, aim at supporting that internally driven agenda for development that we're seeing within the continent.
Thank you. Mr. President, you have unleashed this one. This is our continent. It's our century.
Yes, indeed, and what has just been said, of course, is very correct. And it relates to at least 3 of the questions that were asked, which really center on this question. What are we doing as Africans? And perhaps a challenge. Shouldn't we be doing more as Africans for ourselves? And I think that's a critical question. But fortunately, it's a question that indeed the continent is responding to. What President Ward and myself have been talking about, for instance, with regard to our interaction with the G8, was based precisely on this, that we said to these developed countries, everything that had been tried before, that had come from the World Bank and the IMF and Paris and Washington and London and all these places about African development had failed, in very good measure because those policies and programs originated from outside the continent. So we want to do our own thing. And this is what the continent is, we say. This is what the continent is, this is where it wants to be tomorrow, and this is how it will get there tomorrow. So here is NAPAD. That's where NAPAD comes from. And then say to the rest of the world, this is what we've decided, and this is what we wanted to support. And so it's a very important step forward. So I'm saying that in that sense, we are indeed, the continent is indeed addressing this question. There are many other initiatives. Question is asked, do these African leaders ever say what it is, what are the wrong things they've done? Well, I know many of the African leaders tell me about the wrong things we are doing. Lebumwana was sitting here in front of me. He doesn't hesitate to say, that thing is not right. And it's fine, it's his duty, I accept. Apart from the mechanisms that we have set up, the African peer review mechanism was set up precisely to do this. to create a possibility for an institutionalized process by which, as Africans, we can sit and engage one another. One of the reviews that we processed last year, I think I can mention this, it was about Ghana. It was very interesting to listen to the review. It was very frank, very forthright. And one of the things it said was that corruption at Mbeki was very pervasive in Ghanaian society, right down to the traditional leaders. So if you wanted some service from a traditional leader, you had to pay something. It went right down to that. So indeed, President Kufuor spoke and said, I accept his observations. So what is it that we do? So we discussed that as to say, but well, here is a real problem, and what do we do, all of us together, to assist Ghana to overcome it? So indeed, yes, the African leaders do indeed look at the wrong things that are happening. And I'm saying this particular mechanism seeks to ensure that we are able to review one another and speak quite honestly and quite frankly to one another. Minister of Finance of South Africa, Thabo Manuel, will tell you at some point about another initiative that the continent is taking now. Question that was raised about reliance on ourselves. The Public Employees Pension Fund in this country, for instance, I do not have the assets that it controls now, $60 billion plus. It's very big. And so the people in the leadership of the pension fund said, but why aren't we taking some of this money and investing it in this infrastructure, NEPAD programs, and so on? And indeed, when they looked around, 14, 15 public employees pension funds on the continent had assets of $150, $160 billion among them. And so indeed this month, in fact next month, beginning of July, this partnership of these African pension funds and some of the financial institutions on the continent are launching an Africa Infrastructure Fund, which in the initial launch has got $600 million. In another, by the end of the year, it will be well over $1 billion. All African money, nothing from anywhere else on the outside of the continent. But I'm saying that the African continent is doing those things. And indeed, with regard to the question that's raised about this interaction between government and business, I would really hope that both within individual countries and on this continental scale, in the manner that President Ward was saying, that we need to be able to open up and reach out to one another across these African boundaries. I would hope that the African business people would respond. As I heard the question, it was like, here we sit waiting for our presidents to come. And when they do come, they talk to us for 10 minutes and then go away. What I would advise, why don't you go and park yourself in front of their gates? If they don't want to come to you, go to them. And indeed demand precisely what you are asking. To say, let's form this partnership. And don't wait for us to come. If we're not coming, you come. I think that if we come at this matter in that way, we'll get somewhere. I'm saying that in part because we've actually had a bit of a challenge with regard to establishing what was intended to be a NEPAD Business Council on the continent. You find much greater enthusiasm for the idea from multinational corporations operating on the continent than you find among African business people. So I do indeed support the idea that there must be that partnership, but I think we must take action from both sides. And Tokyo, the last matter.
Okay.
The last matter. Compensation for slavery and colonialism. It's an excellent idea. The problem is that nobody will pay. Thanks.
I'm sorry to do this to us, but we are just prisoners of our times and as well as of time. The conversation is very thought-provoking, and it's just simply rude as a moderator to just cut things off like that. But we are being commanded by other activities outside, lest we be accused of African time. So I'm going to say, Klaus, thank you very much for providing the platform. Maybe you just want to make the last comments. I will not make any summary. Normally people want to summarize. The conference is just opened. This is a plenary, but before you do that, to thank President Thabo Mbeki, to thank President Wade. Obi, thank you very much, Cynthia. Thank you for joining this panel. I'm sure the conversation will continue beyond this. Klaus?
Thank you very much, Tokyo. Great thanks to all the panelists, particularly to the two presidents. Heiko, if I say that all the sessions now following are immediately starting after we get out, so please hurry up to the next sessions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.